Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes I encountered when reviewing the Assignment 2 submissions for my CS253 class in the fall of 2022. First, please make sure you document your code thoroughly. In particular, each aggregate operation should have a comment. Let's now take a look at some specific problems. Here we are in the crawl page method. Here, please make sure to format your code consistently. In other words, put each aggregate operation on its own line, and then of course, you should comment it as well. In this particular case, this is a leftover from the previous feedback on earlier assignments. Make sure to use a method reference here rather than a lambda expression. We've talked about this many times. Your IDE, your IntelliJ or Android Studio IDE should make it possible to do this automatically, so please get in the habit of doing that. Let's now take a look at some issues with transform image remotely. Please get in the habit of using a consistent, fluent interface style of programming. In other words, don't create a separate local variable, but instead chain everything together as a pipeline of calls. Make sure you also pass parameters to the apply transform method. I don't even know how this could possibly compile, much less pass the test, so you're clearly not testing your code. And down here, please make sure to create a parallel stream rather than a sequential stream. Let's take a look at some other problems with transform image remotely. This code here is overly complicated. It doesn't pass the unit tests. In particular, there's no need to start by doing stream of, image, map, and so on, but instead start by just calling the get remote data source method and then chaining together the call to apply transforms. And again, there's no need to use map here. There's no need to use stream of here. There's no need to call flat map here. There are lots of things that are problematic with this code, so you need to make sure you fix that. Now it's time to turn our attention to the server side of this assignment. We're going to take a look first in the main controller.java file and look at some of the problems I saw there. First and foremost, please take a look at the specification above in the file at the top where it explains what kind of methods you're going to be implementing, and make sure that you're using the appropriate annotations. You'll notice here we have a get mapping, and here's a big hint, that's not the right one to use, so please make sure you do that correctly. Likewise, please make sure you use annotations correctly. This particular implementation has no annotations whatsoever, which is incorrect. Coming down here, please make sure you use the appropriate symbolic constant here. Don't use a string, which can get inconsistent with the client, but instead use the symbolic constants that are available in the constants.java file. And make sure you put the proper annotation for things like lists, which will otherwise not work properly. And also, please make sure you use the request part annotation here rather than request param. I don't think your code should be passing any of the unit tests by doing things incorrectly like this. So clearly you're not running the tests, and if you are running the tests, you're not coming to get help. So make sure you get help if your tests are not passing. Here's another thing that can be improved. Please try to avoid using stream support.stream. It works, but it's a little bit too low level. So I recommend instead using the ternary operator like this, where you check to see whether or not the Boolean parameter parallel is true, in which case you'll create a parallel stream, otherwise you make a sequential stream. Continuing on with some problems with apply transforms, please don't format your code like this. As you can see, it duplicates everything, checking to see if it's a parallel stream or a sequential stream. That is completely verbose and unnecessary. Refactor it so it only has that check one place, and you can reuse all the other code. Also, please do not comment your code the way that is done here. Since it's very hard to read, you can see that everything's running off the left-hand side of the screen, the right-hand side of the screen, and coming around to the left-hand side. So instead, you should format the code more like this, so it's much easier to read, and put a little space between each of the operators. So make sure you do that. This is really hard to read and doesn't scale. Continuing with issues with apply transforms, make sure that you conditionally create either a sequential or a parallel stream based on the parallel parameter that's passed into this apply transforms method. Don't just always decide to do parallel streams. And then down here, something important is missing. There's no use of map in order to build the request URL, so that will not be able to even compile, much less work correctly at runtime. Let's now focus our attention on some problems with post request. So first of all, please use post for object rather than post for entity, because by using post for object, you don't need to have the get body called on here. And then secondly, you're passing the wrong second parameter here. It should be the map, not the byte array resource. So that's another thing that will cause a problem. Continuing on with apply transforms again, this particular code is actually unilaterally always creating a sequential stream, which it should not be doing. It should be choosing to do either a parallel or a sequential stream based on the value of the parallel parameter here. And I don't even know what this code is trying to do. It looks like a syntax error. I have no idea how it would even compile, much less run. And the filter shouldn't be there either, so that needs to be cleaned up. Returning back to post request, this is using the wrong overloaded version of post for object. Please use the one that takes 3 parameters, not the one that takes 4 parameters. And yet another issue with post request, there's no need for a local variable. Just go ahead and return the result. So we basically just say return doing rest template, post for object, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So going to be much cleaner and more concise that way. Now we're going to turn our attention to the implementation of the transform controller. And this is the apply transform method. Once again, take a careful look at the comment at the top of the file for transform controller and see what kind of a request you're supposed to be sending and see if that's consistent with the annotation provided here. Another hint, it's wrong. There should not be a use of a path variable here. It should be request param, and this request param should be request part. And I think those things should be picked up by the test. So make sure you run the tests. Make sure if the tests fail, you're coming to office hours and getting help. This constructor implementation is missing a whole bunch of important things. I'm not sure what it's trying to do, but it's incorrect. You need to be putting a bunch of stuff there, not calling one get call. And then here we are in the apply transform method. This is missing a whole bunch of logic. All the stuff that's described here needs to be done, and it's not included. Another thing that you need to do, and we'll cover this more for the next assignment, you need to make sure that you set the result of calling get on the transform map to a local variable so you can check it to see if it's null before you call apply. Because it could very well be that you pass the transform name that it doesn't match what's expected. And so when you look it up using get, you'll get back a null result. And you don't want to be calling the apply method on a null result. That will cause a null pointer exception. So we'll talk more about that, but for the time being, do that check and throw the no such element exception. And then final problem here, this is way too complicated. Don't create a transform image with the default constructor and then try to set the fields. Instead, go ahead and pass in the parameters to transform image, and then you'll be able to make it. And then you should also return it. So you don't want to make a local variable. You just want to say something like return new transformed image, blah, 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 like that. That's what you want to have. And also, there's no need to call this image utils 2-byte array there. That's unnecessary. That was handled earlier in the call to apply. So those are the frequently made mistakes that I found when I reviewed this code. As you can see, there's a fair number of things to address, especially on the server side. So please make sure you address all these comments, and I'll post when assignment 2 will have its final solution ready for being submitted.